On a bright Montana winter morning, a police lieutenant spotted a pregnant German shepherd sitting beside a snowy road with a battered green bowl in her mouth. She returned to the same place every morning, keeping her distance while quietly learning that this stranger could be trusted. Then a powerful snowstorm swept across the mountains, and the shepherd suddenly stopped coming back. The officer followed the few traces the storm had left behind, deep into the frozen timber. What he found inside an abandoned cabin was a tired mother protecting 3 newborn puppies with everything she had left. But the rescue would teach him something harder than finding a lost dog. Sometimes love begins simply by choosing to show up again. Share your own touching story about an animal you love, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Snow had fallen lightly over Whitefish during the night, just enough to soften the shoulders of the road and leave the roofs beneath the mountains looking newly built. By 7 in the morning, the storm had already moved east. The sky was a hard, clean blue. Sunlight caught in the snow gathered on the ponderosa branches, and every now and then a gust shook loose, a glittering curtain that vanished before it touched the ground. Lieutenant Everett Callahan drove toward town with one hand resting low on the steering wheel of his department SUV. He knew the road well enough to anticipate every bend. At 46, after more than 2 decades in police work, Everett had become suspicious of surprises. Most of them arrived carrying paperwork. The radio was quiet. His coffee was still hot. For once, the morning appeared willing to behave. Then something dark moved beside the next curve. Everett eased off the accelerator. A German shepherd sat on the plowed shoulder. Not near the shoulder. On it. The dog was female, lean through the chest and shoulders but carrying a belly so heavy with pregnancy that the shape was obvious even from the road. Her coat was a warm honey sable darkened across the back by an uneven black saddle. One ear stood perfectly straight. The tip of the other bent slightly outward. In her mouth was a green enamel bowl. Everett drove past her. For the next half-mile he argued with himself. The dog had not been in the lane. She had not been injured. There were houses scattered farther down the forest road. Someone could have been letting her out before breakfast. That explanation lasted until he remembered the bull. Damn it! He found a turnout, swung the SUV around, and headed back. The shepherd was still there. She watched the vehicle approach, but did not move until Everett stopped 20 yards away. Then she lowered the bowl onto the snow. Everett remained behind the wheel for several seconds. The dog stared through the windshield. He stared back. "All right," he said quietly. "Which one of us is making the bad decision here?" She offered no opinion. Everett stepped out. The cold immediately found the narrow space above his collar. He wore his dark navy winter duty jacket over his uniform, the badge and shoulder patches visible, with his radio microphone clipped high near his left shoulder. His build was tall and athletic, without the bulk of a younger man trying to prove something. Gray had begun showing clearly at his temples, though the rest of his short hair remained dark brown. The shepherd rose. Not charging. Not retreating. Ready. Everett stopped. Years of police work had taught him that hesitation and fear were not the same thing. The distinction mattered with people. Apparently, it mattered with dogs, too. Ease. The dog's amber eyes stayed fixed on him. Everett opened the passenger door and looked around for something edible. A paper bag held the breakfast sandwich he had bought 20 minutes earlier. He unwrapped it, removed the bread, scraped away the cheese, and separated a piece of plain egg. "This is definitely not what they taught me at the academy." He approached, until the shepherd shifted her weight backward. Everett stopped immediately. Her message was clear. He crouched, placed the egg inside the green bowl, then backed away. Nothing happened. He took another step. The dog watched him. Another. Her nose moved. Only when Everett had nearly reached the SUV did she lower her head and eat. He found himself watching with unreasonable satisfaction. The bowl was old. Green enamel had chipped away around the rim, exposing dull metal beneath, and one side was badly dented. It looked like something that had spent years under a kitchen sink or rolling around in the back of a work truck. The dog finished the egg, lifted her head, and looked at Everett again. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, Callahan. Can you get animal control headed toward Forest Road 8 near the old North Fork turnoff?" The dispatcher answered immediately. "Copy. Injured animal? Doesn't appear injured. Pregnant shepherd? No visible owner. There was a pause. Pregnant? Very. Another pause, shorter this time. Copy that. Everett leaned against the SUV and waited. The shepherd sat behind her bowl. Neither of them seemed interested in moving first. 20 minutes later, a county animal control truck came around the bend. Dana Pierce stepped out wearing a dark olive winter jacket, charcoal cargo pants, and work boots dusted with road salt. She was 39, compact and sturdy, with short black hair and the look of someone who had long ago lost patience with people who believed enthusiasm could replace experience. She took one look at the dog. Oh boy, that's about where I landed. Dana approached slowly, turning her body slightly sideways rather than facing the shepherd head-on. The dog rose. Dana stopped. Good morning, sweetheart. The shepherd backed 2 steps toward the tree line. Dana crouched and studied her. No collar. Not that I can see. Any growling? No. Any attempt to approach you? No. Dana glanced at the bowl. She bring that? In her mouth. Well, that's different. She checked her tablet. No current missing dog report matched a pregnant German shepherd in the area. Dana tried once to close the distance. The shepherd immediately retreated another few feet toward the timber. Everett started after her. Dana put out an arm. No, she's moving into the woods. I can see that. We lose her in there. We may not find her again. Dana looked at him. Don't chase a pregnant shepherd into timber unless you want her next hiding place to be farther away. Everett stopped. The dog stood just inside the first line of trees, only her head and shoulders visible between dark trunks. Dana lowered her voice. She's not feral. Bull tells us that much. Probably lived with people. But right now, she's setting the distance. You want to leave her? I want her to come back. Dana returned to the truck and pulled out 2 stainless water dishes and a small bag of food. We make this boring. Same place, same people, same time if possible. Everett looked toward the trees. And then maybe she decides we're less stupid than we look. The shepherd disappeared. For reasons Everett could not explain, the empty patch of snow bothered him more than seeing her there had. The following morning, she was back. Same place. Same bowl. Everett stopped without arguing with himself this time. He had bought dog food on the way home the night before. He told himself that was because Dana had asked him to. By the 3rd morning, he left home 10 minutes earlier. By the 4th, the shepherd was already waiting when his SUV came around the curve. Everett parked. Morning. She remained seated. He poured food into the bowl. The dog waited until he backed away, though not as far as before. It was progress measured in feet. Everett understood that kind of progress better than he understood most conversations. On the 5th morning, someone else was waiting. A woman stood beside an older Subaru near the roadside, holding a covered plastic container. Everett recognized her as Marjorie Bell, though everyone in town called her Maggie. She owned a small diner near the beginning of the forest road, the kind of place where coffee arrived before the menu and customers knew which waitress had recently become a grandmother. Maggie was 65, small without seeming fragile, wearing a camel-colored wool coat over what looked like an olive diner apron. Silver blonde hair curved around her jaw, pinned to one side with a tortoiseshell clip. She lifted the container. Chicken. Everett sighed. You know, animal control told us not to turn this into a buffet. Then they can arrest me for poultry. That's not how arrest works. I was a nurse for 31 years, Everett. I know exactly how arrest works. Different kind. The shepherd appeared near the trees. Maggie immediately stopped talking. Her expression changed. Not softer exactly. More careful. She knelt, opened the container, and placed 2 small pieces of boiled chicken into the green bowl after Everett added the dog food. The shepherd watched. Maggie sat back on her heels. No rush, honey. Everett glanced at her. You talk to every stray dog like that? I talk to paying customers worse. The shepherd approached. 3 steps. Pause. 2 more. She ate while Everett and Maggie stood nearly 15 feet away. When she finished, she did something she had not done before. She lifted the bowl but did not immediately disappear. Instead, she stood in the road shoulder, with it hanging from her mouth, and looked directly at Everett. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds, long enough to feel deliberate. Then, she turned and slipped into the timber. Maggie exhaled. Well? Everett looked after the dog. What? She checked whether you were watching. You got all that in 3 seconds? No, I made most of it up. He almost smiled. That became the routine. Everett brought kibble and water. Maggie contributed small pieces of plain meat and commentary nobody had requested. Dana checked the feeding station every few days and reminded both of them that patience was more useful than good intentions. The shepherd remained cautious, but she began eating while Everett stood closer. Then, while Maggie spoke. Then once, with Dana visible near the truck. Maggie started calling her Rowan. Everett objected on principle. You name a dog, people start thinking they own it. No, people start admitting they care whether it comes back. He had no answer for that. So Rowan stayed. One clear morning, after Rowan finished eating and lifted the bowl, Everett decided to follow. Not close. He waited until she had entered the trees, then moved after her at a distance. Snow muffled his steps. His slate-blue shell jacket brushed against low branches as he followed the faint movement of sable fur through the timber. Rowan knew he was there. He could tell almost immediately. She did not run. She continued roughly 100 yards, following what looked like an old game trail beneath the pines. Then she stopped, turned, and looked back. The green bowl hung from her mouth. Everett stood still. Rowan's amber eyes remained on him. There was no fear in the posture, no invitation either, just a boundary. Everett had spent most of his adult life walking past boundaries because someone needed him on the other side. Crime scenes, domestic calls, accidents, hospital rooms, doors behind which people were having the worst hour of their lives. But this one was not his to cross. All right. He raised one gloved hand. You win. Rowan watched until he turned around. When Everett reached the road, he looked back. She was gone. That evening, his house felt particularly quiet. It was not a large place, but one person could make even a modest house seem excessive. Everett hung his winter jacket by the mudroom door, set his keys in the ceramic dish on the counter, and reheated leftovers without turning on the television. His phone lay face down beside the sink. When he picked it up, the voicemail notification was still there. Claire, 3 days old. He knew what the message said. He had already listened twice. He pressed play anyway. Hey Dad, it's me. I'm trying to track down that old box of family pictures. The brown one, I think? Mom says you might still have it. There's one picture I need for a project. No rush. Just call me when you get a chance. Okay. Bye. Everett stood alone in the kitchen after the message ended. No accusation. That almost made it worse. He could have called immediately. Instead, he set the phone down. The next morning, he left the house 12 minutes earlier than usual. When he rounded the curve, Rowan was already there. She sat beside the snowbank with the battered green bowl between her front paws. Waiting. Everett pulled over. For a moment, he remained behind the wheel. He looked at Rowan. Then, at the phone resting in the center console. There was no sensible connection between a wary dog waiting beside a road and a 22-year-old daughter whose voicemail he had avoided for 3 days. Still, something about the two of them occupied the same uncomfortable place inside him. Everett picked up the bag of dog food. He left the phone where it was. But this time, before stepping out of the SUV, he turned it face up. Over the next 2 weeks, Rowan changed by inches. That was how Everett measured it. Not in affection. Not in trust. Certainly not in anything as dramatic as loyalty. In distance. The first morning, she had required nearly 20 feet between herself and the nearest human before she would eat. By the middle of February, she sometimes lowered her head to the green bowl while Everett stood 6 feet away. 6 feet was not friendship, but it was no longer fear. Everett found himself respecting the distinction. Rowan still refused every attempt at touch. If his hand moved too quickly, her head lifted. If Dana shifted her weight toward her, Rowan stepped back. She never snapped or barked. She simply made her limits known with a precision Everett admired. People were rarely that clear. Dana Pierce continued checking the feeding station every few days, keeping notes on Rowan's appetite, movement, and physical condition. One morning, she stood beside her animal control truck with a paper cup warming both hands while Rowan ate. She's been around people, Dana said. Everett glanced at her. Because of the bowl? Because of everything. Dana nodded toward Rowan. She understands cars. She doesn't panic at doors closing. She knows what a food bowl is. She watches hands, but not like she's never seen them before. She knows people can mean shelter, and she also knows they can mean trouble. Everett studied the shepherd. Any luck finding an owner? Nothing useful. No matching reports. No calls from nearby shelters. No breeder records that could be connected to her. No one had posted a pregnant shepherd matching Rowan's markings. Dana shrugged. Sometimes there isn't a mystery. Everett looked at her. That disappoint you? It disappoints people who think every stray dog has a dramatic backstory. Rowan finished eating and lifted the green bowl. Dana continued. Sometimes a dog belonged somewhere, then somehow she didn't. That sentence followed Everett longer than he expected. Belonged somewhere, then didn't. He had been telling himself for years that Claire had simply grown into a life that required less of him. Missoula had become hers. College had become hers. Friends he had never met, places he had never seen, holidays negotiated by text messages. It was easier to call that adulthood than distance. Easier still to pretend the distance had appeared on its own. Rowan disappeared into the trees. Everett remained beside the road after Dana left, looking at the last place her tail had vanished between the trunks. He finally checked his phone. Claire had not called again. He told himself that was reasonable. He had not called her either. Maggie Bell, meanwhile, had apparently decided Rowan required conversation as much as food. On clear mornings, she brought a folding chair outside the diner and placed it 10 feet from the feeding station. She wore her camel coat over her olive apron, a thermos beside one boot, and spoke as if Rowan had reserved a breakfast table. She discussed the price of eggs, a waitress who had called in sick 3 Fridays in a row, a delivery driver who could not understand the phrase back door. Rowan listened with the grave patience of someone unwilling to interrupt a senior citizen. Everett occasionally stood nearby with coffee. One morning Maggie was quieter than usual. Rowan ate while thin sunlight moved across the snow. Maggie held her thermos but did not drink. He asked me yesterday if I was his sister. Everett knew immediately who she meant. Walter Bell had been living in a memory care facility outside Kalispell for almost a year. Everett had seen him only once before that, at the diner several years earlier, a broad man with a booming laugh who had insisted that maple syrup belonged on nearly everything. Everett looked toward Maggie. She was watching Rowan. "I'm sorry." Maggie gave a small shrug. "I told him no." He apologized. That somehow sounded worse. Everett searched for something useful to say and found nothing. Maggie rubbed one thumb over the lid of her thermos. "Funny thing is, he still smiles when I walk in." Rowan lifted her head at the sound of Maggie's voice. Everett asked, "Does that make it easier?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. A few seconds passed. Then Maggie said, "But it makes going back worth it." Everett looked down at his coffee. The words landed somewhere he did not want them. Not because Claire had forgotten him, because she hadn't. That was the problem. He had spent years telling himself he was respecting her space, when perhaps all he had really done was make absence easier to maintain. Rowan stepped closer to Maggie's chair, not enough to touch. Enough that Maggie noticed. She said nothing. That restraint impressed Everett more than if she had reached out. The shepherd smelled the air, then lowered her nose to a small patch of chicken beside the bowl. Maggie kept both hands wrapped around her thermos. "You see?" she murmured. Everett almost asked what, then decided he knew. Showing up did not guarantee anything. It only kept the door from closing completely. 2 days later, the Weather Service changed everything. A Pacific system moving east was expected to collide with Arctic air dropping through western Montana. Forecast maps shifted from cautious yellow to winter storm red. 12 inches became 18. Wind speeds climbed. County emergency management started sending warnings before lunchtime. At the station, Everett spent half the day coordinating staffing plans for the storm. Extra patrol units were scheduled. Tow contractors were alerted. Officers were reminded that people would still attempt mountain roads after being specifically told not to. By late afternoon, Everett called Dana. "We need to get her in." "I know." Dana had already arranged for a large live trap. They placed it near the feeding station the next morning, well before the storm was due. It was not a crude cage, but a sturdy, humane enclosure, large enough for Rowan to enter without crouching. Dana covered the top and sides with canvas to make it feel less exposed. Food went at the back. The green bowl remained outside at first. Rowan emerged from the timber on schedule. She stopped. Everett could see the difference immediately. The trap was new, New meant wrong. Dana stood 20 yards away, hands in her pockets. No talking. Everett gave her a look. You mean me? I mean everybody. You just happen to be the everybody most likely to ignore instructions. Rowan approached the trap. She smelled the entrance. One paw crossed the threshold. Everett felt himself stop breathing. Rowan stretched her neck toward the food, then backed out. She walked around the trap once, inspecting the canvas, the wire, the snow beneath it. After nearly 10 minutes, she picked up her green bowl and left. Everett swore under his breath. Dana did not move. We try again tomorrow. The storm starts tomorrow afternoon. I know. If she's about to give birth, I know. The calmness in Dana's voice irritated him. We could push her in once she's close enough, and teach her that the feeding station is where people trap her. Everett's jaw tightened. Dana looked at him more carefully. You don't like waiting? No. You're going to have to. The following morning, Rowan was late. 10 minutes. Then 20. Everett stood beside his SUV with snow beginning to drift from a sky that had lost all the hard blue of earlier weeks. Maggie came out from the diner carrying chicken. Still nothing? Everett shook his head. At 32 minutes, Rowan appeared. She moved more slowly than usual. Snow clung between her toes and along the fur beneath her belly. Everett took one step forward before stopping himself. Rowan reached the green bowl. Dana arrived just as she began eating. Within seconds, her expression changed. What? Dana crouched at a distance. Watch hair flank. Everett did. At first he saw nothing. Then Rowan's side tightened. A subtle contraction ran through her belly and released. She paused over the food. Everett felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the weather. Dana said quietly, She's close. How close? Could be hours. Could be a day. I'm not making promises from 20 feet away. Rowan ate only half the food. That frightened Everett more than any growl would have. He looked at Dana. What about remote sedation? No. You didn't even think about it. I have thought about it. Dana kept her eyes on Rowan. Pregnant dog. Unknown exact stage. Unknown medical history. Cold conditions. No controlled recovery area. We don't use sedation because we're uncomfortable with uncertainty. The words hit harder than she intended. Or perhaps exactly as hard. Everett looked away. Dana softened slightly. We can give her options. We can't make every option safe by force. They abandoned the trap. Instead, Everett and Dana moved a portable insulated shelter beneath a stand of trees within sight of the road. They lined it with dry straw, added water nearby, and placed food just inside the entrance. Maggie contributed an old wool blanket until Dana made her remove it because loose fabric could become wet and colder than straw. Maggie complained for 7 uninterrupted minutes. Rowan ignored the shelter. She finished drinking. Then she picked up the green bowl. Everett watched her move toward the tree line. Rowan. The dog stopped. Her head turned slightly. The bent tip of her left ear stood against the gray forest. Everett had no command to give. No reason she should understand anything he said. Still, he heard himself ask, You have somewhere to go? Rowan looked toward the trees. Then she walked into them. Everett noticed something he should have noticed earlier. She always left along the same line. Not approximately. The same narrow opening between 2 pines, then downhill beyond a fallen trunk before turning north. Not wandering. Traveling. She knows where she's going, he said. Dana followed his gaze. Looks like it. That should have reassured him. It didn't. By noon, the first real snow began. By 3, the mountains had disappeared. The storm hit harder after dark. Everett spent the next 48 hours working. A delivery van slid into a snowbank. A sedan spun at an intersection and blocked both lanes. 2 tourists had to be persuaded that 4-wheel drive did not change the laws of ice. There were welfare checks, stalled vehicles, a broken heating system at an apartment complex, and long stretches where visibility shrank to the reach of the headlights. Everett stayed busy enough that no one would have guessed he was thinking about a dog, but every time his patrol SUV passed the forest road, his eyes went automatically toward the shoulder. Nothing. The second morning, the feeding station had nearly disappeared under drifting snow. No tracks. No green bowl. Maggie called his work phone. Anything? No. You think she's all right? Everett looked through the windshield at a world reduced to white motion. She knew where she was going. He meant it as reassurance. Maggie was quiet. "So do you believe that?" Everett did not answer quickly enough. "Thought so," she said. The storm finally weakened during the night. By morning, the sky had cleared with almost offensive beauty. Blue returned from horizon to horizon. Fresh snow sat deep and untouched beneath the pines. Sunlight flashed on every surface until Everett had to lower his visor. County plows opened one lane of the forest road. Everett drove out before beginning his shift. The feeding shelter was half buried. He stopped at the familiar curve. For 2 weeks, this place had contained small certainties. A green bowl, sable fure, Maggie's bad jokes, a dog that never let him close enough to touch her but had somehow trained him to arrive 10 minutes early. Now the shoulder was smooth. Wind had erased everything. Everett stepped out of the SUV. Cold air filled his lungs. He waited. There was no movement between the trees. No amber eyes watching from beneath the branches. No bent ear. No battered green bowl against the snow. Everett stood there long after there was any practical reason to remain. For the first time since Rowan had appeared, nothing was waiting for him. Everett called Dana before he called anyone else. He was still standing beside the buried feeding station when she answered. "She's not here." Dana did not waste time asking whether he had waited long enough. How much new snow? Too much to read from the road. And nothing at the shelter? Nothing. There was a brief pause. Then Dana said, "Stay where you are." Everett looked toward the trees. "I can start along the route she was using." "No. I know the direction. You know the first 100 yards. That's more than we had yesterday. And less than you think." Her tone was calm, which irritated him more than if she had argued. Dana arrived 20 minutes later and walked the roadside with him. The storm had erased nearly everything. The feeding shelter was half buried. Snow filled the shallow depressions where Rowan had once stood. Wind had smoothed the shoulder until it looked untouched. Dana crouched beside the opening in the timber, where Rowan usually disappeared. She was close to delivering when we last saw her. "I know. Night temperatures dropped below 0. "I know." Dana looked up at him. "Then stop saying it like repeating it makes this your call." Everett said nothing. She stood and brushed snow from her knees. "I'm contacting County Search and Rescue. For a missing dog, that would normally have been excessive." Dana knew it. Everett knew it. But Rowan was not simply an animal that had wandered from a backyard. She had been heavily pregnant, had moved consistently along the same route for weeks, and had disappeared before a 2-day storm. The forest beyond the road contained old maintenance structures, forgotten service tracks, drainage cuts, and enough steep ground to turn an impulsive search into a second emergency. Most importantly, Everett had already shown every sign of becoming that emergency if no one stopped him. By mid-morning, a white county utility truck pulled in behind Dana's vehicle. Sylvie Markham stepped out carrying a slate-colored pack. She was 42, lean and long-limbed, with weathered fair skin and brown-blonde hair tied low beneath a charcoal knit cap. Her burnt orange shell jacket stood bright against the snow. A GPS unit was clipped high on one shoulder strap, while a small analog compass hung beside it. She gave Everett a quick once-over. "You Callahan?" "Lieutenant Callahan." Sylvie nodded as if he had told her the temperature. "You have winter navigation training?" "Some." "Mountain rescue?" "No." "Backcountry medical?" "Basic." Sylvie tightened one glove. "Then today you're the guy who knows the dog. I'm the one who knows the mountain." Everett stared at her. Dana turned away, poorly hiding a smile. "I can follow instructions." Sylvie looked at Dana. "He say that often?" "Usually, right before improving them." Everett ignored both of them. Maggie arrived before they left the road. She came out of her Subaru wearing her camel coat, carrying a thermos in one hand and a backpack in the other. "I'm coming." "No," Everett said. She continued walking. "I brought food." "Maggie, I've lived here 38 years. That does not make you search and rescue. It makes me familiar with snow. It makes you 65. Her eyes sharpened. That was almost very stupid. Dana stepped between them before the argument gained momentum. Sylvie handled it differently. "We need you here." Maggie turned toward her. "If Rowan comes back to the road, she knows you," Sylvie said. "She may not approach a county truck. She may not approach Dana. She definitely won't care about me." Maggie looked toward the trees. Sylvie continued. If she returns while we're out there, I need somebody she trusts enough to keep her from leaving again. That stopped her. Not because Maggie agreed. Because Sylvie had given her a job that mattered. Maggie slowly lowered the backpack. All right? Everett expected another comment. Instead, Maggie handed him the thermos. Coffee. I have water. I didn't ask what you had. They entered the forest just after 11. The first 100 yards were familiar to Everett. Beyond that, everything changed. Snow reached well above his boots, deeper where wind had pushed it between trees. Branches bowed under new weight. The world had become strangely quiet, not empty, but muffled. Every sound shortened by snow. Sylvie moved steadily rather than quickly. She did not search for a perfect trail. She searched for interruptions. A scraped patch beneath a low branch. Compressed snow behind a trunk where an animal might have paused. A small scatter of sable hair caught beneath rough bark. Everett pointed to it. Sylvie crouched. Could be hers. You sound enthusiastic. I sound accurate. They marked the location. Farther on, they found a partial paw print preserved beneath the heavy skirt of a pine. Everett knelt. The rear of the print had sunk deeper than the front. She was carrying weight. Sylvie nodded. Maybe. Everett glanced at her. That's Rowan. Probably. You always talk like that? When certainty matters. The answer bothered him because he understood it. Police reports were built from the same discipline. Observed. Probably. Confirmed. Not what you wanted to be true. They continued. At a narrow opening between two old firs, Sylvie stopped. The snow beyond them formed a shallow corridor where deer had packed a route over time. Game trail. Everett looked down the slope. She could have used this. She probably did. That single word probably felt like progress. For another 40 minutes, they followed fragments rather than footprints. A depression beneath roots. Another tuft of hair. Then, near the base of a fallen tree, Everett saw something that did not belong to the winter colors around it. Green. He dropped to one knee. A tiny enamel chip was wedged between exposed roots, no bigger than his thumbnail. One side was forest green. The other showed dull metal beneath. Everett removed one glove and picked it up carefully. Sylvie crouched beside him. The bowl? He turned the fragment in his fingers. The same shade. The same aged enamel. One broken edge was white, where the coating had separated. Yeah. For the first time since leaving the road, Everett felt something stronger than worry. Direction. Rowan had been here. Not in theory. Not because he wanted her to have come this way. The bowl had struck something hard enough to lose a piece. Sylvie marked the point on her GPS. How far from the road? Just under 1.5 miles. Everett looked northeast. Then we keep going. Sylvie checked the time. We keep going for 30 minutes. That's not enough. It's what we have. The trail is getting better. The daylight is getting worse. We just confirmed direction. And that confirmation will still exist tomorrow. Everett stood. She could have newborn puppies out here. I know. Then why are we talking about leaving? Sylvie's face did not change. Because Cole doesn't care why we're here. He took a step toward the trail. Sylvie did not physically block him. She did not need to. There's nothing brave about making rescue come back for us. Everett turned sharply. You think that's what this is? I think you're used to being the person who decides when enough is enough. I'm used to finishing the job. Sylvie looked toward the darkening trees. You being a lieutenant doesn't make sunset negotiable. The words hit him cleanly. For a few seconds, neither moved. Everett hated the fact that she was right. More than that, he hated how familiar the feeling was. There had been other moments in his life when he had called persistence responsibility simply because stopping felt like failure. He looked down at the green enamel chip resting in his palm. Then he put it carefully into a small evidence envelope Dana had given him. 30 minutes back to the last marker? Sylvie nodded. Then rode. They turned around. Maggie was waiting when they emerged. She searched Everett's face before asking anything. He held up the small envelope. We found part of the bowl. Maggie closed her eyes briefly. Good. It means she went northeast. That's good. Everett heard what she was doing, taking one piece of information, not asking it to become more than it was. That evening, his house felt crowded despite being empty. His wet gear hung in the mudroom. The map Sylvie had sketched lay open on the kitchen table. Everett had transferred the GPS points onto a printed topographic sheet and circled the probable route in pencil. His phone rang. Claire. For 1 second, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Then he answered. Hello. There was silence. Then Claire said, Wow, you're alive. Everett leaned against the counter. Apparently, I was starting to think you'd changed numbers and forgotten to tell me. I've been working. I know. The sentence had no anger in it. That made it worse. Everett looked toward the brown cardboard box he had finally taken down from the hall closet. I found the pictures. A pause. That's why you answered? He closed his eyes. No. Claire waited. Everett tried to find the next sentence. Something simple. Something honest. He could speak to grieving families. He could stand between two furious strangers and lower the temperature of a room. He could explain a collision report to someone who wanted a different version of reality. But Claire's silence made language feel fragile. I've been looking for a dog, he said. Another pause. That sounds like you. What does that mean? You always know what to do when somebody needs something. The words were not cruel. He almost wished they were. Everett looked at the map. I don't know what to do. Claire was quiet for several seconds. That's new. Yeah. He wanted to say more. That he was sorry. That he had listened to her voicemail 3 times. That he had found the photographs the first night and left the box unopened because returning them meant admitting he had no reason not to call. Instead, he said, I can bring the pictures down. You don't have to drive to Missoula for a box. I know. Again, silence. Claire finally said, Just mail them. All right. Okay. The call ended less than a minute later. Everett remained at the counter holding the phone. He had spent the afternoon reading a trail from bent branches, compressed snow, and 1 chip of green enamel. His own daughter had spoken in complete sentences. He had understood less. At first light the next morning he met Sylvie at the forest road. The sky had cleared. Their orange trail markers from the previous day were easy to locate beneath the trees. They moved faster now, not because they rushed, but because the first section no longer required investigation. Past the green enamel find, the game trail descended through thicker timber. Sylvie stopped near a shallow ditch. Look! A curved drag line crossed a protected patch of snow beneath a cedar. Everett crouched. The groove was narrow, bow width. Near it lay a partial print, fresh enough that its edges had not collapsed. Everett felt his pulse climb. They followed the route another quarter-mile. The trees opened slightly. Below them, nearly hidden by snow-heavy branches, ran the faint straight line of an old Forest Service road. Sylvie checked the GPS. This hasn't been maintained in years. Everett scanned downhill. Something interrupted the trunks. Not natural. A roofline. Low. Gray. Snow-loaded. They moved closer. An abandoned maintenance cabin stood beneath the pines, half concealed by the slope. 1 shutter hung crooked. The porch had disappeared beneath drifted snow. Everett stopped. Sylvie lifted 1 hand. Don't move yet. They listened. At first there was only wind moving high through the trees. Then Everett heard it. A sound so faint he thought it might have come from a branch. A low, tired whine. His chest tightened. Sylvie looked at him. Neither spoke. A second sound came from inside. Higher. Smaller. A thin squeak, almost lost in the cold air. Everett stared at the cabin. Rowan had gone somewhere. Now they knew where. Sylvie did not let Everett move another step until she had their position transmitted. She raised the radio clipped to her shoulder and gave County Search and Rescue the coordinates twice, slowly enough for confirmation. Old maintenance cabin off the abandoned service road, she said. Possible live animal inside. We have vocalization. Structure is snow, loaded but standing. Static answered, then a dispatcher confirmed that a snowmobile unit would stage on the nearest service road access. Everett stared at the cabin. From this distance, it looked less like shelter than something the forest had forgotten to finish burying. Snow pressed against the low porch. 1 shutter hung crooked beside a clouded window. The roofline sagged slightly in the center beneath several days of accumulation. Another faint sound came from inside. Smaller this time. Everett took a step. Sylvie caught his sleeve. Outside first. We know she's in there. We know something is in there. He looked at her. She did not blink. Everett exhaled through his nose and let her work. Sylvie circled the cabin slowly, studying the roof, foundation, and snow load. She tested the porch edge with one pole before putting weight on it. "No obvious collapse on this side," she said. "Roof's stressed. We don't stay longer than we have to." A voice came through the radio. Donna. She had come in by the lower approach with equipment after Sylvie's first update and was less than 10 minutes out. Everett disliked 10 minutes. He waited anyway. By the time Dana appeared between the trees, pulling a compact gear sled behind her, Everett had counted every board on the cabin's front wall. Dana wore her dark olive field jacket and carried a rigid animal carrier, thermal wraps, towels, water, and basic emergency supplies. "You went inside?" she asked. "No." Dana looked genuinely impressed. "Growth." Sylvie pointed toward the roof. "Limited time." Dana nodded. "Then we go quiet." The cabin door resisted at first. Everett pushed carefully until ice broke loose along the threshold. A stale smell met them: old wood, cold ash, damp straw, animal musk. The single room was dim, even with sunlight outside. Everett entered first, flashlight angled low. A rusted stove stood near one wall. A broken chair leaned beside a narrow shelf. Snow had drifted through a cracked rear window and formed a white crescent across the floorboards. Then his light reached the far corner. 2 amber eyes reflected back. "Rowan." She lay against the wall, curled tight around something hidden beneath her belly. Her coat looked darker than Everett remembered, damp and clumped along her sides. The heavy curve of pregnancy was gone. For a second his mind refused to assemble what that meant. Then something moved beneath her. A tiny back. A paw no bigger than his thumb. 3 puppies. Everett stayed where he was. One male was larger than the others, his newborn coat already showing a dark sable stripe across his back. A second male had warmer tan markings around the muzzle and face. The third was a female. She was noticeably smaller. She lay near Rowan's hind leg, barely visible except when her body shifted. Beside Rowan, against the wall, rested the green bowl. Everett stared at it, not because it solved anything, because it had made the journey too. Dana entered behind him and stopped. "Oh, sweetheart." Rowan's head lifted. A low warning filled the room. Everett immediately froze. Every instinct that had brought him this far demanded movement. Reach her. Check the puppies. Get them warm. Do something. Dana spoke quietly. Let her make the next decision. Everett lowered himself slowly onto one knee. Rowan watched every inch. "Hey, girl." Her warning continued. He did not move closer. "It's me." Nothing changed. He set the flashlight on the floor so the beam pointed away from her face. "Maggie's waiting for you." Rowan's ears moved. Everett almost smiled. "Yeah, the chicken lady. She's probably insulting me right now." The warning weakened, but did not disappear. He kept talking. "The road's open again. Sun's out. You missed a spectacular argument about whether my coffee counts as coffee." Dana glanced sideways at him. "Does it?" Not helping. For the first time, Rowan lowered her head slightly. Everett noticed more than her exhaustion. There was old straw beneath her, not just enough to have blown through the cabin. A flattened bed of it lay in the corner. Dark sable hairs clung to one wall several inches above the floor. Scratches crossed the boards near the doorway, old enough that frost had settled inside them. Dana saw it too. "She's been staying here." Everett looked around again. The cabin had not been a desperate discovery during the storm. Rowan had known it, possibly for weeks. Every morning she had left this place, followed the same route toward the road, carried her bowl to food, then returned. The realization changed the shape of everything. She had not wandered into danger. She had built the best plan she could with what she had. Everett looked at her. "You knew exactly where you were going." Rowan closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. Dana assembled a short extension pole and attached a shallow water dish. She slid it slowly across the floor. Rowan tensed. Everett stopped speaking. The dish came within reach. Dana withdrew the pole. Rowan smelled the water, then drank. Once, twice, again. Everett felt some tight place inside his chest loosen. Then the smallest puppy moved. It crawled weakly away from Rowan's body, its tiny legs pushing against the boards without direction. Rowan tried to hook it closer with one foreleg. She missed. The puppy gave a faint sound, not the sharp squeak Everett had heard outside. This was thinner, Dana's expression changed. "Don't touch her yet." "I'm not." Dana pulled out a satellite communicator and moved closer to the doorway where the signal had a better chance. The connection took 2 attempts. A woman answered. "Flathead Emergency Veterinary. Dr. Naomi Voss." Dana described the situation. Naomi's voice came through, clipped by static but calm, with the efficient patience of someone used to making decisions from incomplete information. "Mother conscious?" "Yes." "Responsive?" "Yes." "Any obvious heavy bleeding?" "No." "All 3 pups breathing?" Dana looked toward Everett. He watched the smallest one carefully. "Yes." "But one is cold and weak," Dana added. Naomi's tone sharpened. "Do not put that puppy directly on a heat source. Dry first. Wrap, gradual warming. If the mother allows contact, keep the puppy close to human body warmth inside insulated layers." Everett looked at Rowan. "How do we know she allows it?" Naomi answered before Dana could. "You don't. You read the dog in front of you, and you don't force the issue unless the puppy is failing." Sylvie's voice came from outside. "Roof is making more noise." As if answering her, a soft wooden groan traveled across the ceiling. Everett looked up. Fine powder sifted through one seam. "Not collapse." "Not yet." Dana crouched beside him. "We need that puppy warmer." Everett extended one hand slowly. Rowan lifted her head. He stopped. "Eossi." His hand remained suspended halfway between them. No reaching. No grabbing. Rowan smelled the air. Her eyes moved from Everett's hand to his face. He waited. Seconds stretched. Then Rowan's head lowered again. Not approval. Not trust in any human sense Everett could claim. Simply no refusal. He moved. The puppy weighed almost nothing. Everett wrapped her first in a dry towel Dana passed forward, then in a thermal layer. He opened the top of his winter jacket and tucked the wrapped bundle securely against his chest. For a moment he felt nothing. Then a tiny movement pressed through the layers. Everett swallowed. "Got you." Rowan watched him continuously. He lowered himself enough for her to see the bundle. The puppy shifted again. Rowan's nose moved toward her. "No one's taking her," Everett said. Dana looked at him but said nothing. They checked the 2 larger puppies without separating them from Rowan. Both were moving, seeking warmth, making small, irritated sounds whenever disturbed. Good sounds. Rowan tried to stand. Her front legs straightened. Her rear legs did not. She sank back down. Everett's relief disappeared. Dana studied her. "She's exhausted." "Can we carry her?" "Not unless we have to." Another groan passed through the roof. This one was sharper. Sylvie stepped into the doorway. "Snow is shifting above the stove side. We need to move." Dana nodded. They prepared the evacuation sled outside and lined it with insulated pads. The rigid carrier would hold the puppies during the short transfer, but Dana refused to let Rowan lose sight of them. Everett placed the 2 larger puppies inside while keeping the smallest wrapped against his chest. Rowan immediately struggled upright. Her body trembled. Everett held the carrier low where she could see and smell them. "Right here." Rowan took 1 step. Stopped. Dana moved beside her, not pulling, only supporting her chest with a folded sling. Another step. Sylvie stabilized the doorway. They moved slowly enough that the process felt almost absurd compared with the urgency of the roof. But rushing Rowan now could cost more time than patience. At the porch, she balked at the sled. "Donna let here smell it." Everett lowered the carrier close. One of the male puppies squeaked. Rowan climbed onto the padded surface. Her legs folded beneath her almost immediately. Dana covered her loosely against the cold. Everett placed the carrier beside her where she could keep her nose near the ventilation openings. Only then did he remember the bowl. He looked back through the cabin door. Green enamel caught the flashlight beam in the dark corner. "Everett," Sylvie warned. 10 seconds. He went back. The cabin suddenly seemed emptier without Rowan in it. He crossed the room, picked up the battered bowl, and felt the dent beneath his glove. It was just metal, chipped enamel, an object built to hold food. But Rowan had carried it morning after morning. She had carried it from this room into the snow and back again. Everett tucked it under one arm. When he stepped onto the porch, Dana glanced at it. "You risked 10 seconds for a bowl?" Everett looked toward Rowan. "No." He secured it to the gear sled. "For something she knows." Sylvie gave him a long look, then nodded toward the service road. "Move." The small group started through the trees. Rowan lay beneath the insulated cover, the carrier pressed close to her side. Inside Everett's jacket, the smallest puppy shifted against his heartbeat. Behind them, the cabin remained standing beneath its burden of snow. Everett did not look back again. He had found Rowan. Now finding her was no longer the job. Getting all 4 of them out was. The snowmobile team met them exactly where Sylvie had said they would. 2 machines waited on the abandoned service road, engines idling in the bright winter cold. Between them sat a low rescue sled lined with insulated pads and secured beneath a weather cover. Everett felt an immediate, almost embarrassing relief at the sight of other people. Not because the work was finished, because for the first time since entering the cabin, there were more hands than problems. Rowan remained awake, but exhausted. Dana kept the carrier containing the 2 larger puppies pressed close enough for her to smell them, while Everett continued holding the smallest female inside his jacket. The puppy had moved twice during the hike. Both times, barely. Everett had counted each movement as if it were an answer to a question he was afraid to ask aloud. Sylvie spoke briefly with the rescue crew, then pointed toward the safest route down. "We keep it smooth. No racing." One of the rescuers nodded. Everett climbed onto the sled beside Rowan. Dana raised an eyebrow. "You know they have another seat." "I know." Rowan's eyes stayed fixed on the carrier. Everett rested one hand near it. The green bowl had been tied securely beside the gear. They began the descent. The trip to the road felt longer than the search had. Cold wind slipped beneath Everett's collar. Snow hissed beneath the runners. Every vibration made him aware of the small body against his chest. When the rescue team finally reached the county access point, Dana had already arranged transport directly to the emergency veterinary clinic in Kalispell. No stops. No paperwork first. No photographs. The clinic needed the animals more than anyone needed the story. Dr. Naomi Voss was waiting when the vehicle arrived. Everett recognized her voice before he recognized her. "Mother stays where she can see the puppies." Naomi was in her mid-40s, slim, composed, with dark hair threaded by a few natural streaks of silver and pulled into a low knot. Thin metal-framed glasses sat high on her nose. Deep teal scrubs showed beneath a gray fleece jacket. She moved quickly without ever appearing, rushed. That distinction reminded Everett of Sylvie. The kind of competence that did not need to announce itself. Rowan was transferred first. The puppies followed within her line of sight. The smallest female left Everett's jacket only after Naomi placed both hands around the thermal wrap and said, "I have her." Everett released the bundle. His arms felt strangely empty. Naomi glanced at him. "You did the right thing, keeping her warm gradually. She going to be okay?" Naomi did not soften the answer. "She has a chance." It was not what Everett wanted. It was what he trusted. The clinic doors closed between them, and suddenly there was nothing for him to do. Everett stood in the hallway wearing damp uniform trousers, a winter jacket darkened with melted snow, and boots that left small puddles on the tile. He looked at his watch. His shift had ended hours ago. Dana was completing the intake paperwork. Sylvie had already returned to the county staging point. No one needed Lieutenant Callahan. He sat down anyway. Through a narrow window in the treatment room door, he could see movement. Warmed fluids were started for Rowan. Staff members worked in quiet coordination around the puppies. The larger 2 were placed close together inside a heated enclosure, while the smallest female received separate attention. Everett found himself counting again. One body moving, then another, then the smallest. 3. Maggie arrived carrying 4 coffees and a paper bag large enough to suggest she did not believe veterinary medicine could proceed without sandwiches. Her tortoiseshell hair clip sat crooked, something Everett had never seen before. She handed him a cup. "You look terrible." "Thanks." "You're welcome." She sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Maggie watched the treatment room window. Everett watched her hands. They were wrapped tightly around the coffee but did not shake. "How's Walter?" he asked. Maggie's eyes remained on the glass. "Today he called me ma'am." Everett turned toward her. Maggie gave a humorless little smile. "Very polite." Asked if I worked there. "You okay?" "No." The simplicity of the answer left no room for the useless comfort Everett might otherwise have offered. Maggie took a drink. "I'm still going tomorrow." Everett looked through the window. Rowan lay beneath a warmed blanket. Even exhausted, her head remained turned toward the enclosures holding her puppies. "I figured you would." "Why?" He thought about it. Because she smiled. Maggie looked at him. Everett nodded toward the clinic room. "You said Walter still smiles when you walk in." Something in Maggie's expression shifted. Not relief. Recognition. "Yeah," she said quietly. "He does." That night stretched into early morning. Dana finally went home after promising to return. Maggie dozed briefly in a waiting room chair with her coat folded under her head. Everett did not sleep. Shortly after 2, Naomi came through the door. Everett stood. The veterinarian removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose, then put them back on. "Mother is stable. And the pups?" "The 2 males are doing reasonably well." Everett waited. Naomi knew which question remained. "The female is still too cold, but her temperature is moving in the right direction. She's accepting supplemental feeding." "Is that good?" "It's better than the alternative." Everett almost smiled. Naomi crossed her arms. "She needs time, Mr. Callahan." "Lieutenant." Naomi looked at his wet uniform. "Not in here." That time, he did smile. Barely. By dawn, the smallest puppy was still alive. There was no dramatic turnaround, no sudden burst of strength. She simply continued breathing. Then, feeding. Then, sleeping beneath careful warmth. Sometimes survival looked disappointingly ordinary. Everett discovered he preferred it that way. Over the next 3 days, Rowan improved steadily. Her dehydration responded to fluids. Her appetite returned in small portions. Naomi found no serious complication from the birth, only the consequences of prolonged poor nutrition, exposure, and exhaustion. The 2 male puppies became louder. One objected enthusiastically every time he was handled. The other crawled into whatever warm space his brother had just found. The little female required more help. Naomi refused to predict too much. "She's gaining ground," was the most Everett could get from her. Maggie visited every afternoon after closing the diner's lunch shift. Dana began the legal process of determining whether Rowan had an owner. Once Rowan was well enough to tolerate handling, they scanned her carefully. No microchip, no tattoo, no current identifying tag. Dana checked reports throughout Flathead County and neighboring areas, then expanded the search through regional shelters. Nothing matched. Everett had expected this to bother him less than it did. He had imagined that finding an owner would feel like resolution. Instead, the absence of one made Rowan's past seem oddly hollow. Dana noticed his expression while reviewing the paperwork. "Don't build a story where we don't have one." "I'm not." "You are absolutely building one." Everett looked at her. Dana tapped the file. "What we know is simple. No chip, no matching report, no claimant yet. That's all." Everett nodded. "Facts. Not wishes." He understood facts. Weeks passed. The required public notice period ended without anyone establishing ownership. Rowan and the puppies were formally moved into foster status, while adoption decisions waited until the puppies were old enough and Rowan fully recovered. By then, Maggie had become part of Rowan's routine. Not through food anymore, through presence. One rainy afternoon, Everett arrived at the clinic and found Maggie sitting beside Rowan's enclosure reading a paperback mystery. "You reading to the dog?" "No, I'm reading near the dog." That distinction seems important. It is to Rowan. Maggie opened the enclosure door after Naomi gave permission and placed one hand palm up on the floor. She did not move closer. Rowan watched. Nearly a minute passed. Then Rowan shifted forward. Her nose touched Maggie's fingers. Maggie remained still. Rowan moved again and slowly lowered her head beneath Maggie's open palm. Maggie's breath caught. She did not pet immediately. She simply let her hand rest there. Tears filled her eyes. Everett pretended not to notice. After a moment, Maggie whispered, "There you are." Rowan closed her eyes. Something about the scene stayed with Everett. Not because Maggie had finally touched Rowan, because she had waited until Rowan closed the distance herself. Everett began visiting more often. He developed excuses. Checking paperwork. Dropping off forms for Dana. Driving through Kalispell. Naomi stopped believing him by the second week. One evening, she found him sitting outside the recovery area, watching the 3 puppies wrestle awkwardly over a folded towel. "You drove 40 minutes to check paperwork?" "I was nearby." Naomi looked at him over her glasses. You live in Whitefish. Everett considered several responses. None survived. Naomi nodded toward the puppies. You're allowed to care about them without making it sound administrative. I'll keep that in mind. You probably won't. She walked away. His phone vibrated. A message from Claire. No words. Just a photograph. Everett opened it. He knew the picture immediately. Claire was about 8 years old, sitting on the end of a wooden dock with a fishing rod almost as tall as she was. Everett sat beside her in an old baseball cap, one arm extended to help guide the line. Neither was looking at the camera. They were both laughing at something outside the frame. Everett had forgotten the picture existed. He stared at it until the screen dimmed. His thumb hovered over the response bar. A heart reaction would be easy. Safe. Enough to acknowledge the photograph without requiring anything afterward. He almost chose it. Then he remembered Maggie's hand resting motionless on the enclosure floor. Waiting was not the same as disappearing. Everett pressed Claire's name and called. She answered after 4 rings. Hey. A pose? You got the picture? Yeah. I found a scan. I remember that day. You dropped the worms in the lake. Everett frowned. I did not. You absolutely did. That sounds made up. Claire laughed. It was small, but real. Everett leaned back in his chair. Behind the glass, Rowan slept while 3 puppies shifted against her. The conversation with Claire remained awkward. They talked about the photograph, her project, snow in Missoula, a professor she disliked. Nothing was fixed. No old hurt was resolved. But when they finally said goodbye, Everett checked the call length. 11 minutes. The last one had barely lasted 1. He put the phone away. Inside the enclosure, the smallest puppy pushed between her brothers and found a place against Rowan's chest. 3 small bodies rose and fell together. Everett remained in the chair a little longer. This time, he did not bother inventing a reason. By the time the puppies were old enough to leave Rowan, they had become impossible to discuss as a group. They had been born together, slept in the same heap, fought over the same toys, and learned to turn every clean blanket into something requiring immediate laundry. But they were no longer simply the 3 puppies. They were 3 separate problems. Everett discovered this when he announced, with what he considered reasonable confidence, that he could take all of them. Dana looked up from the adoption paperwork. Naomi stopped writing. Neither woman spoke. Everett waited. Finally, Naomi removed her glasses. 3 shepherd littermates and police shifts? I have a fenced yard. That is not an answer. I've handled working dogs before. Dana leaned back in her chair. You've handled trained adult dogs in professional settings. Everett crossed his arms. I can manage puppies. Naomi put her glasses back on. 3 shepherd littermates and police shifts? That's not noble. That's a management problem. Everett looked from one woman to the other. You 2 rehearse these conversations? No, Dana said. You just make them easy. The puppies, entirely unaware that their futures were being debated, were wrestling under Naomi's desk. The largest male had one paw over his brother's face. The smaller male was trying to escape with a shoelace. The little female sat apart from them, watching Everett with the focused expression she seemed to reserve for human behavior. It was tempting to imagine that keeping them together was kindness. Naomi corrected that too. They need individual confidence, separate training, separate attachment, separate time with people. Everett glanced toward them. And separating them is better? Gradually, Dana said. Done well. Yes. That phrase bothered him. Done well. As though separation could be responsible without being painless. He had spent years using that same argument on himself. Eventually, he signed 1 application instead of 3. The little female had already chosen her preferred location in the clinic whenever Everett visited, near his boots. She did not climb into his lap or demand attention. She simply tracked where he moved, and, when the room settled, found a place close enough to know he was there. Naomi noticed. Don't make a mythology out of it. I wasn't. She was the weak puppy. You helped warm her. That does not mean she owes you a life. Everett looked down at her. I know. Naomi studied him long enough to decide whether he meant it. Apparently satisfied, she nodded. The puppy became Wren. Claire suggested the name during a phone call. She's small and loud when she wants something, Claire said. Seems appropriate. Everett had looked up the bird afterward. He never admitted that. Rowan's future took longer. Maggie wanted her. Wanting, Dana reminded her, was not the same thing as having a workable plan. Maggie ran a diner. She visited Walter several times a week. Rowan was an adult German Shepherd who needed exercise, routine, veterinary care, and someone capable of managing a large dog through Montana winters. Maggie responded to the first interview by arriving with a handwritten schedule. She had hired a morning manager for the diner 3 days a week. A neighbor had agreed to help with midday walks. Her backyard fence had been repaired and raised. She had arranged a dog-friendly route for visiting Walter's facility, where Rowan could remain in the garden area when permitted. Dana read the pages. "You did homework." "I was a nurse. We enjoy forms when they belong to other people." The formal approval took time. Rowan made her opinion simpler. Whenever Maggie entered the foster room, Rowan's body changed. Not dramatically. Her ears softened. Her posture loosened. She followed Maggie without being asked. On the day Maggie took her home, Rowan walked through the front door of the pale blue house, smelled every room once, then settled beside Maggie's chair, as if she had only been away for an afternoon. Maggie sent Everett a photograph. Rowan was asleep, with one paw resting on Maggie's boot. The caption read, "Terrible adjustment. Please advise, Everett saved the picture." The largest male went to Sylvie. She named him Mason after rejecting several suggestions Everett considered perfectly good. What was wrong with Atlas? Everything. Tracker? Worse. Mason? She looked at the puppy, who was enthusiastically investigating a cardboard box with his entire head inside it. Mason. The name stayed. Even before adolescence, Mason had a habit of using his nose before his eyes. He searched under blankets, traced footsteps through the yard, and ignored thrown toys if an interesting scent crossed their path. Sylvie kept the work light. Short scent games. Finding a glove behind a tree. Following a family member across fresh grass. "No career planning," she warned Everett. "He's good. He's 6 months old. He's still good." So was I at finger painting? The second male became Otis. A local couple with 2 older children adopted him after several supervised visits. They had owned shepherds before and understood exactly what they were getting. Otis loved people. He loved grocery bags. He loved snow. He loved squirrels enough to forget most other information temporarily. Dana once watched him abandon a perfectly good obedience exercise because someone opened a bag of chips 30 feet away. She smiled. Family dog. Everett looked at her. "You say that like it's a category." "It is." "Not a lesser one?" Dana's expression changed. "No." The answer stayed with him. By autumn, Wren had grown into a lean, young shepherd, smaller than Rowan but balanced and strong. Her coat carried more warm brown than black, and the cream triangle on her chest had become more distinct. She was not driven like Mason. She did not search every room. She did not need constant work. But she noticed people. If Everett came home irritated after a long shift, Wren did not crowd him. She lay several feet away until he sat down. Then she moved closer. No training had produced that. It was simply her nature. Everett eventually stopped wondering what job he should give her. That realization surprised him. Mason, however, kept showing potential. When he was old enough for preliminary assessment, Sylvie invited Everett to observe a search and rescue training day. Observe became participate within an hour. Everett liked the structure immediately. Maps, radio channels, defined search sectors, weather checks, clear responsibilities. The problem was that he also liked correcting things. On the second training day, he adjusted a marker Sylvie had deliberately placed. She stared at him. "What?" "I improved the visibility." "It wasn't yours to improve. It was facing the wrong direction. It was testing whether the handler noticed." Everett put it back. "You enjoy this?" "Immensely." Months later, Mason worked a scent trail through mixed timber near the training area. The exercise was simple in theory. A volunteer had walked a route, crossed a gravel track, then hidden near a stand of young pines. Mason worked confidently at first. Nose low, tail level. Sylvie gave him room. Everett followed several yards behind. Then the wind changed. Mason lost the line. He circled once, then again. Everett could feel impatience rising in his own body. He headed 20 yards back. Sylvie said nothing. Mason pulled toward a false trail. Everett stepped forward. "We should move him back." Sylvie raised one hand. "Last known point. Mason returned with her to the place where the scent had last been reliable. No frustration, no punishment, no insistence that the dog should already know. Sylvie waited. Mason lowered his nose, moved 3 feet, stopped, turned, tried another direction. This time his posture changed. He had it again. The trail rebuilt itself slowly. 5 minutes later, Mason found the volunteer behind the pines and barked once in delighted triumph. Sylvie rewarded him. Everett remained standing at the last known point. The phrase had lodged somewhere deeper than training. Last known point. When lost, return to the last place you knew something was true. Not the place you wished had been true, not the version you had invented afterward. The last real thing. For Everett and Claire, he knew what that was. Before the years of careful distance. Before missed calls became normal. Before he had started calling absence respect. He had once been the person she expected to answer. That evening, Everett drove south. Not immediately. First, he called. Claire picked up on the 3rd ring. Hey. Hey. He watched the highway unwind toward Missoula. Are you free for coffee? A pause. When? Tonight. Another pause. Are you already driving here? Yes. Claire sighed. That is technically not the same as asking first. I called before I got there. That is a very police answer. Everett smiled. Just coffee? Just coffee. She waited a moment. Okay. They met at a small cafe near campus. Claire arrived wearing a burgundy coat with her camera bag across one shoulder. She looked tired, older than Everett remembered whenever he made the mistake of remembering her at 17. He stood when she approached. She noticed. You don't have to do that. I know. They sat. Everett ordered coffee. Claire ordered tea. For once, he did not begin with an explanation. He asked about her project, then about work, then about the professor she had complained about on their last call. Claire answered cautiously at first. Everett resisted the urge to offer solutions. When she mentioned uncertainty about a job application, he almost told her what he thought she should do. Instead, he asked, What do you want? Claire stopped stirring her tea. Her eyes lifted. It was a small reaction, but Everett saw it. I don't know yet. Okay. She waited for the advice that did not come. After a moment, she smiled faintly. That's it? That's it. Who are you? I've had training. From the dog? Several. Claire laughed. They did not discuss the divorce. They did not discuss the years Everett had missed. He did not apologize in one perfect speech and expect the account to balance. They drank their coffee and tea. Claire showed him photographs on her camera. He asked questions, more than he answered. When they stepped outside, Missoula was cold and clear. Claire pulled on her gloves. Text me when you get home. Everett looked at her. She shrugged. Roads might ice. Right. He understood it was not forgiveness. It did not need to be. It was a door still open. Okay, he said. I will. Then he did. 2 years after Rowan first appeared beside Forest Road 8 with a dented green bowl in her mouth, Mason failed his final wilderness search evaluation. Not dramatically. He simply lost the scent. The volunteer had crossed a patch of frozen ground, doubled back near a stand of lodgepole pine, and continued uphill. Mason followed confidently for nearly half a mile before the wind shifted and carried him toward the wrong drainage. Sylvie stopped him. They returned to the last confirmed point. Mason searched again. He found part of the trail, lost it once more, and finally sat in the snow, looking at Sylvie as if the answer had been removed from the world. She ended the exercise. No anger. No disappointment disguised as encouragement. Just information. 3 weeks later, they tried again. This time, Mason worked more slowly. He checked the wind instead of fighting it. He returned to uncertain ground without being asked. When the trail scattered across a logging spur, he circled patiently until his head lifted and his posture changed. 30 minutes later, he found the hidden volunteer beneath a stand of young firs. Sylvie knelt beside him, while an evaluator signed the final paperwork. Mason had earned certification for wilderness search under the county SAR program. Everett stood a few yards away with Wren at his side. He expected to feel something grand. Instead, he felt proud because he remembered the failures, the bad turns, the exercises Mason had misunderstood. The days when Sylvie had stopped early because the dog was tired. The certification mattered because it had not been inevitable. Sylvie walked over holding the signed form. "You're smiling." I smile. I've seen reports contradicting that. Everett looked at Mason, who had already abandoned his professional dignity to roll in fresh snow. "Good dog." Sylvie nodded. "Yeah, that was enough." Otis, meanwhile, had achieved nothing remotely official. He lived 12 minutes outside Whitefish with a family who had 2 children, a red minivan, and a couch they had once claimed dogs would never be allowed on. Everett had photographic evidence that the policy lasted 4 days. Otis slept upside down against the cushions, stole socks from the laundry room, and had developed an unreasonable fear of the vacuum cleaner. He had never located a missing hiker, never earned a certificate, never worn a working vest. His family adored him. No one considered that a lesser ending. Wren's life was even less impressive by measurable standards. She lived with Everett. That was it. She walked with him before work, slept beside the mudroom radiator when snow came in on his boots, and waited near the kitchen whenever he cooked because experience suggested food occasionally fell from human hands. She never became a police K-9. Everett never trained her for SAR. He had stopped looking for a professional purpose to justify her intelligence. Wren did not need one. That lesson had taken him longer than he cared to admit. For most of his adult life, Everett had understood people through usefulness. Officers carried assignments. Witnesses carried information. Equipment performed a function. Even he had measured himself by what he could solve, organize, protect, or endure. Wren possessed none of those obligations. She was simply his dog. And somehow that had become enough. Claire began returning to Whitefish more often. Not every weekend. Not according to a schedule Everett could count on. Sometimes she came for dinner and left the next morning. Sometimes she stayed with friends and met him only for coffee. Once she came home for 3 days and spent most of Saturday editing photographs at his kitchen table while he changed the oil in his truck. Their relationship never became what it had been when she was 8. Everett eventually understood that it was not supposed to. She was no longer the child in the fishing photograph. He was no longer entitled to the version of fatherhood he had neglected and then missed. They were building something new. 2 adults learning one another again. He called first now. Not every time. Enough. Claire stopped sounding surprised when his name appeared on her phone, and she stopped asking, directly or indirectly, whether he was calling because something had happened. Sometimes nothing had. That was the point. Maggie continued visiting Walter. Some days he recognized her before she crossed the room. Other days he smiled politely and waited for an introduction. Rowan often accompanied her when weather allowed, spending visits in the enclosed garden outside the memory care wing. Walter never seemed to remember the dog from one visit to the next. But Rowan did not require memory. She would walk to his chair, smell his hands, and eventually rest her head on his knee. Walter always smiled. Once, he looked at Maggie and said, "That's a beautiful dog." Maggie answered, "She thinks so too." Walter laughed. For the rest of that afternoon, he called Maggie by her name. The next visit, he did not. Maggie went back anyway. Late that winter, she suggested they bring the dogs together. "Not a reunion," she told Everett over the phone. "What is it then?" "A Sunday morning." That sounded like Maggie. The weather cooperated. An old layer of snow remained in long white bands beneath the pines, but the road was dry, and sunlight had begun to carry the first weak warmth of approaching spring. Everett drove out with Claire in the passenger seat and Wren in the back. When they reached the familiar curve, Maggie was already there with Rowan. Rowan was older now. Silver had begun touching the fur around her dark muzzle, though her honey sable coat remained thick and healthy. The tip of her left ear still bent outward. She watched Everett's vehicle stop. Then her tail moved, not wildly. Rowan had never done anything wildly unless food was involved. Sylvie arrived 10 minutes later with Mason. Otis's family followed in the red minivan. The moment the side door opened, Otis came out wearing a ridiculous blue winter bandana. Sylvie looked at it. "No." His youngest human laughed. "He picked it." He did not. "You can't prove that." There were no cameras except Claire's. No county officials. No newspaper. No plaques. Just people standing beside a road on a bright Montana morning while 4 German shepherds worked out how much they remembered. Mason approached Rowan carefully. Wren followed. Otis ignored caution entirely until Rowan gave him one steady look. He stopped. Maggie laughed. Some things survive motherhood. The dogs moved around one another, smelling ears, shoulders, tails, the details no human could read. Then Rowan began to trot. Mason followed. Otis joined immediately. Wren hesitated near Everett for half a second before running after them. 3 grown dogs disappeared between patches of sunlight and shadow, circling Rowan through the snow. Claire lifted her camera. Everett heard the shutter several times. Maggie opened the back of her Subaru. "I brought something." She removed the green enamel bowl. Everett had not seen it in months. The dent remained. So did the missing chip. No one had restored it. Maggie carried it to the roadside and placed it on the snow near the place Rowan used to wait. No ceremony. No explanation. Rowan eventually wandered over. She smelled the bowl. Everett watched closely. For 2 years, he had sometimes wondered what she would do if she saw it again. Perhaps recognize it. Perhaps guard it. Perhaps produce some gesture profound enough for people to misunderstand. Rowan sniffed it once. Then Wren ran past. Rowan immediately left the bowl and chased her. Claire lowered the camera. "That's kind of perfect." Everett looked at the bowl sitting alone. "Yeah." 2 years earlier, Rowan had carried it because she understood one simple thing. Bowls held food. Food meant another morning. That was all it had needed to mean. Everett had once thought the story began because he rescued a dog. He no longer believed that. He had stopped his vehicle. Then he stopped again the next morning. Maggie brought chicken. Dana knew when pursuit would make things worse. Sylvie knew when darkness meant turning around. Naomi had refused to promise what medicine could not guarantee. Maggie kept visiting Walter. Claire answered another call. None of it looked heroic when separated into individual moments. Maybe that was why it mattered. "Dad?" Everett looked at Claire. "Yeah?" "You're doing that thing." "What thing?" "Thinking instead of talking." He laughed. "Working on it." Claire handed him one of the coffees she had brought. Wren returned from the trees and leaned briefly against his leg before racing back toward the others. Everett watched her go. Ahead of him ran 3 dogs born on the same winter night. Mason searched for people lost in wilderness. Otis slept on a couch and stole socks. Wren went home with Everett and expected breakfast at an unreasonable hour. None had received the same life. None needed to. Claire stood beside him, sipping her coffee. Everett could have told her Rowan had saved him. People like stories like that. A broken man. A wounded animal. 2 lives repaired in one clean exchange. It would have been easier than the truth. The truth was that Rowan had done no such thing. She had appeared beside a road. Everything afterward had required choices. Repeated ones. Imperfect ones. Everett had learned to stay. Claire had decided to give him somewhere to stay. That was different from rescue. It was better. The dogs moved farther along the snowy shoulder before circling back. Behind them, the green bowl remained where Maggie had placed it. No one hurried to pick it up. For once, Rowan did not need it. And for once, neither did Everett. Sometimes the most meaningful change begins with something small. Stopping the car, answering the phone, returning the next day, or simply refusing to disappear from someone's life. Rowan never needed to become a miracle, and neither did the people around her. What mattered was that they kept showing up. Maybe that is the lesson for us too. Love is not always proven by one heroic moment, but by the quiet decision to be present again and again. If this story stayed with you, share what it reminded you of in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, second chances, and the small choices that bring us closer to home. May you have the courage to keep showing up for the people and lives that matter to you.